Welcome to the Hotelligence Podcast, your strategic vantage point on the changing landscape of hotel safety. Hosted by Jim Kortz, a retired FBI DHS investigator, and Don Carr, a former frontline security owner-operator with years of first-hand incident response experience on hotel properties. Every episode brings you closer to understanding the full picture and what the future may hold. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the Hotelligence Podcast. This is episode 8, When Capability Outpaces Governance. I'm Don. I've owned and operated boots-on-the-ground security guard companies, serving hospitality and multifamily properties. That work eventually evolved into systems architecture and designing how information moves, where it stops, and when it escalates. Most risk in hospitality doesn't come from obvious emergencies. It comes from gray space, weak signals, ambiguous situations, things that aren't nothing, but aren't clearly actionable either.
And I'm Jim. So I spent my career in federal law enforcement, mainly focused on complex investigations. So from that perspective, I've seen how organizations are judged after something goes wrong, not just on what they did, but on what they were expected to know. And I think that distinction matters.
It does indeed, Jim. So today we're talking about what happens when capability moves faster than governance. Hospitality as an industry is under pressure to adopt more technology. AI tools, pattern recognition, cross-property data visibility, automated summaries, anomaly detection. So to be clear, most hotels are not running advanced investigative systems across properties. In many environments, that would materially shift their duty and liability posture. But the capability now exists in the market. And that's the structural issue. What happens when capability exists faster than governance is designed to contain it?
Yeah, because capability doesn't just increase efficiency, it increases perceived knowledge. And perceived knowledge changes hindsight. When something goes wrong, investigators don't just ask what you knew, they also ask what could you have known. So if a system existed that could connect dots or surface repetition, that capability becomes part of the evaluation. Not your intent, but your capability.
And there's a progression that unfolds quietly with this, because capability increases knowledge, knowledge increases foreseeability, foreseeability increases duty, and duty increases liability. And there's no meeting to announce this, and there's no policy formally activated for this. It forms around what is possible.
So Don, let's walk through a hypothetical. So let's imagine a technology vendor demonstrates a platform that can correlate low-level incident entries across properties. Individually, each entry is ambiguous. A repeated room request, a booking pattern, or an unusual payment method, nothing criminal in isolation there, but aggregated, that they resemble a pattern. Before aggregation, those are isolated observations. Before aggregation, those are isolated observations. After aggregation, they look connected. So now the question shifts. Not did something happen, but what was foreseeable?
And here's the pivot. The technology didn't create the pattern. It created the visibility. And visibility is what changes expectation.
Once visibility exists, ambiguity shrinks. And once ambiguity shrinks, the definition of reasonable response expands. That's where organizations get surprised. They may adopt a tool to organize information, but the tool quietly increases foreseeability.
Most hotel incidents, they live in a gray space. They're not confirmed crimes. They're not emergencies. They're weak signals. Historically, weak signals either escalated too early or disappeared entirely. Escalate too early, and you risk overreaction. Guest friction, discrimination claims, brand conflict. Do nothing, and you risk hindsight scrutiny later. Technology doesn't eliminate that tension. It redistributes it.
If a system alerts in real time, response becomes expected. If a system identifies individuals, investigative behavior becomes implied. If a system aggregates across properties, organizational knowledge expands, even if leadership never intended to increase duty, even if governance hasn't caught up.
And this is the governance gap, Jim. Most technology conversations focus on capability. What can it detect? How fast can it notify? What can it connect? So the executive question should be different. If we adopt this, what duty does it create? And just as important, if we don't adopt it, how does industry capability shift expectation anyway? So because systems don't just process information, they redefine accountability.
And juries don't evaluate architectural nuance. They evaluate what appears possible. If something could have been seen, the argument becomes that it should have been seen. Expectation hardens around capability.
And here's the harder question. What happens when a brand standard says monitor activity, but governance never clearly defines what monitoring means? Is it periodic review? Is it continuous observation? Is it investigative follow-up? If capability runs constantly, are you now expected to respond constantly? And that's where capability quietly outruns structure.
Automation removes friction. Human ambiguity used to slow expectation, but technology accelerates it. And once friction disappears, the interpretation of reasonable shifts. And that shift is rarely deliberate, it just becomes assumed.
So restraint in this environment isn't resistance to innovation, it's really governance discipline. And there's a structural difference between documentation systems, monitoring systems, and investigative systems. Each creates a different liability posture, and collapsing them into one increases pressure. The separation of them preserves that discretion.
Separation preserves judgment. Judgment preserves proportionality. When everything becomes real-time and aggregated, proportionality is harder to defend.
So technology will continue expanding what's possible. Visibility will increase, correlation will get easier, automation will sharpen. Governance has to decide what that capability means before something goes wrong. Because once an outcome occurs, no one asks how advanced your tools were. They ask whether your response framework matched your visibility.
Capability is inevitable. Foreseeability is contextual. Duty is structural. So if capability grows faster than structure, liability fills that gap. But if structure leads, capability can be absorbed without expanding expectation.
And in hospitality, leadership isn't defined by how much you can see. It's defined by how deliberately you define what seeing requires. And most of the situations we're talking about, they're not dramatic. They're subtle, they're ambiguous, they're low confidence. And that's exactly why structure matters. Because when something eventually goes wrong, no one asks how thoughtfully the architecture was designed. They ask whether governance kept pace with visibility. So structure must lead capability, not because technology is dangerous, but because clarity is protective. And in hospitality, clarity, not speed, is what keeps risk from escalating in a straight line. In the next episode, we'll look at a common assumption people make, why property level do not rent lists rarely work the way people expect.
And remember, we're in this together.
And together, we make hospitality stronger. We publish a short written insider briefing alongside each episode. It goes out on Wednesdays when the episode drops. If that's useful, the link is in the show notes.
Thank you for joining the Hotelligence podcast, where experience informs smarter, safer hotel operations and prepares you for what comes next. Stay informed, stay confident, and stay connected. As the conversation evolves, Jim Cords and Don Carr will highlight developments that help hotels strengthen their approach to safety and risk management. See you next episode.